Hello everyone, this is Hairy Nick. How are you all doing? It's time to talk about some new stuff that FFG and Asmodee at large revealed at Gencon. So, it seems like they've scored a license to produce Marvel games, which, apart from anything else, is a very good sign moving forward for the Asmodee and FFG license. Because we do have to appreciate that Disney already have a very good working relationship with Hasbro, who owns Wizards of the Coast. So, there's always the slight chance, possibility, whatever, that the FFG games could eventually end up going to Wizards of the Coast and just making the Disney Goliath more concentrated and giant. So, Asmodee scoring yet another major Disney IP, in my books, is a good thing, because it means that we have a clear definition of what Hasbro is doing, a clear definition of what Asmodee is doing with FFG, and now more of their companies as well in Atomic Mass Games, which we'll talk about in a second. With this license, Asmodee is producing 2 new games. Under the banner of FFG, they are producing the Marvel Champions LCG. For those of you who aren't aware, an LCG is very similar to a TCG, like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon, except an LCG, a living card game as opposed to a trading card game, is the kind of game where you don't buy booster packets of random cards, you buy expansions of predetermined decks, so you know exactly which cards you're going to get. It means there isn't so much of this aftermarket that ends up making the game silly expensive. Although that still is possible. There can still be very important cards that are printed and there's not a good print run on certain expansions. However, this is rarely the case under FFG. They often seem to print enough expansions that this doesn't seem to happen with the other LCGs like Netrunner or Lord of the Rings. Speaking of which, the design team of the Marvel Champions game is headed by Nate French, Caleb Grace and Michael Boggs. 2 of those which have worked heavily on the Lord of the Rings living card game and the Netrunner living card game. Now, I personally have not played Netrunner myself, but I have played Lord of the Rings. And when you start to take a look at the rules of everything involved in Marvel Champions, you can see the very common similarities. Now, this video is not going to be a deep dive on the rules of these new games. I'm just summarising everything that was announced at Gen Con. If you'd like to see that, head over to Team Covenant's channel. Crabox also done some great work actually videoing some of the demos over at Gen Con. All the links for that will be down in the description. I'm sure there's more, which I'll find by the time I've edited this video. But in terms of the model of this, of being a living card game, I think this is actually the best thing FFG could have done. I don't think making this a trading card game, apart from anything else, apart from, market penetration, that kind of stuff. FFG already have a reasonably successful TCG in the form of Star Wars Destiny, so I don't think adding another one to the market would have been a good move. And this helps the game focus on being more casual for the more kitchen table players, as well as adhering to the fluff of what they want to try and achieve with their game. Indeed, if we take a look at some of the stuff that was shown off at FFG's in-flight presentation at Gen Con, we can see that the core elements of empowerment, being fast-paced, humorous, and larger than life, are really at the heart of what FFG want to achieve here. But apart from that, they really want to hone in the focus on playing as one particular character with this game, squaring off against 1 or 2 particular villains. And that's what this game's all about. It's about embodying the experience of being a Marvel heroes. Speaking of those, let's have a look at the heroes that are available in the core set. In the core set, you can be one of 5 heroes: Iron Man, She-Hulk, Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, and Black Panther. And also, as a part of that, you can play as the alter egos. Once per turn, you're able to flip, or I guess for us Magic players, transform into the hero or alter ego. All of the alter ego cards have this recovery value in the top left-hand corner, and all the hero cards have thwart, attack, and defense. So it's more about strategizing and recovering when you're in your alter ego form, and more about actually fighting the villain when you're in your hero form, which is cool. It makes for some nice dynamic play. And this is something that's very new for FFG LCGs. This is something that we don't have in Lord of the Rings, for example. In Lord of the Rings, you play as several different characters in a much more simplistic fashion. There is no alter egos transforming into other characters. It's a lot more straightforward, but of course you have more characters, so that alone adds more complexity. Each player builds a 40 card deck with a combination of cards that are generic for all heroes and cards that can only be played with certain heroes, like these Spider-Man cards, for example. These are, in general, more powerful cards because they can only be played with certain heroes, but do bear in mind that you will need generic cards because they offer a lot more versatility. In order to play cards like any other card game, you need a resource. And the great thing about this game, it uses the sort of hybrid method of making every card either a resource or be some kind of effect you can play. The resource value of the card is indicated in the bottom left-hand corner. It's one of several resources, and the amount of resources you need to spend in order to play the card for its effect is in the top left-hand corner. Some cards require different kinds of resources, but many of them just have a number, which can be any amount of different kinds of resources. Apart from that, it seems to be very similar to other living card games like Lord of the Rings, where basically the villain deck draws cards and adds minions and effects to the game, which you have to conquer with your heroes. Pretty straightforward. The core set comes with 3 different scenarios based on Rhino, Claw, and Ultron, getting more progressively harder as you go through those 3 options. The core set's going to be releasing in October, and every month after that we're going to be getting an expansion, starting with the Green Goblin in November, Captain America as a new hero in December, Miss Marvel in January, and the Wrecking Crew Scenario Pack in February. Scenario packs represent villain decks that you have to play through and beat with your hero decks, and of course the hero decks are based around heroes. Each of these hero expansions will come with a new hero card and a bunch of unique cards that go along with them, as well as a bunch of generic cards that you can use in any deck. Makes perfect sense. Pretty straightforward. And again, head over to the courage of the various people that are actually at Gencon. FFG have done some demo games as well as Team Covenant, and you can see how the game is played. Currently, at the time of recording this video, we do not have a rulebook up on FFG's website. Given this is coming out in October, I would imagine that's going to go up very, very soon. Now let's move over to this announcement by Atomic Mass Games, who are a new company under the banner of Asmodee, and actually presented this new game as part of the FFG in-flight report. Being a new company, that can be quite difficult, so using the stage at FFG's presentation was a chance for them to sort of really get their foot in the door and get noticed, so that makes perfect sense. Apart from anything else, Asmodee have this new Marvel license, so they're gonna flaunt it as best they can. Now, the impression I got of Atomic Games, we don't know a whole lot about them right now, is they seem to be almost like a supergroup of several different talented people within the industry that Asmodee have arranged into this company, with talent from companies like Privateer Press, who, apart from anything else, have a great reputation with minis and paint. So that's a good sign right off the bat. But the company is focused on making miniature-style games. So yes, while this new Marvel Minis game could have been made by FFG, we know that they are more than capable of doing that now with Star Wars Legion. It perhaps makes sense to give this new company the Minis game while FFG get the LCG, which they have a lot more practice in. So yes, this is Marvel Crisis Protocol, a new mini squad-based game. Very different from something like Star Wars Legion, which is more about armies fighting armies. This is a small amount of minis with a lot more complexity on each of their abilities. This is more akin to the kind of Marvel game that we saw from Knight Models, as well as their like Batman and Harry Potter game and that kind of thing. By the way, I do want to quickly mention Knight Models because they did own the license to make Marvel games a little while back, but unfortunately due to mismanagement with the licensing, it just never came to any real fruition. They released a lot of minis, which I suppose you could use in this new game if the scale's roughly correct. But yeah, Knight Models unfortunately has a bit of a history of that. They're having similar issues right now with their Harry Potter game, which I actually originally started to cover on the channel, but then at the last moment it turned out that they completely stuffed up the license and wouldn't send anything to Australia. And after that experience, I'm just not interested in covering any of their stuff anymore. That is not really acceptable, I think, in this day and age. So it's good to see that a company backed by Asmodee actually has this license now, which gives me a bit more confidence in the health of this game, at least. The minis are cast in hard plastic like the newer Legion models or those from GW. Detail looks good from the images we can see. Obviously, these are just computer renditions, so quality will vary based on what happens when they actually release, but early signs are good. We've already got images of a pretty decent array of characters. Right now, based on what we've seen from the presentation, In the core set, we have Zemo, Spider-Man, Red Skull, Iron Man, Captain America, Black Widow, Captain Marvel, Dr. Octopus, Ultron, and Crossbones, I think that is. I'm not as big a Marvel nerd as I am Star Wars, so I may have got that last one wrong. And we seem to have expansions coming out relatively soon for Hulk and MODOK. Although it is worth pointing out, if you take a look at the boxes themselves, the core set says CPO 1 and these two expansions are CPO 4 and 5. So there might be another couple of expansions coming out before them. Actually, if you take a look at the website, you can see at the bottom of the page, coming soon for Captain Marvel, Red Skull and Iron Man. So perhaps just separate expansions for those will be coming out first. But who knows? Maybe they're just going to be articles on how these heroes work. Don't know. Look, being a new company, we don't know what their habits are in terms of releasing articles and stuff. When it comes to things like FFG, we can pretty much predict how things are going to come out in terms of news, but we pretty much have to guess when it comes to these. Each hero comes with a hero card with a bunch of stats and attacks and stuff, and right off the bat, you can see that this is way more complex than most like FFG games. Just next to the hero portrait, we have a few attacks and more abilities down below. Now, it is worth pointing out that the rules for this are available online. Again, I'm not going to go through all of that right now, but if you read through that, you can make sense of what all of these stats mean. In terms of the art style, like I gotta say, the FFG LCG is much more comic-like, sort of more akin to the Marvel deck builder game, if you were aware of that. This game seems to err a little bit more on the side of realism, but not too dissimilar. I must say I do like the art style on all of these. We also have revealed the character card for Black Panther from the presentation and Captain America in the rulebook, so you can take a good look at and get a decent amount of inspiration for squad building before we get any more information through articles on this game. We know a little bit about how tournament play is going to work. Basically, you take 10 heroes to a tournament and you take half of these crisis cards, which are these ones here. And basically, between you and your opponent, you make a full scenario of crisis cards, and then you elect a certain amount of heroes from the 10 heroes you took. This seems very similar to the way you draft a game at the start of Star Wars Legion, where between you and your opponent you work out the certain conditions for the battlefield. There seems to be a fair amount of agency for both players to affect how this works, and I always like seeing this kind of approach with minigames. I think that's a fair and balanced way of doing things. The Marvel's Champions LCG is slated for release in the fourth quarter of 2019, and Crisis Protocol for spring 2019, so probably roughly around the same time. And for the time being, without doing a deep dive on the rules, that's the information we have so far. So, what do you all think of this? What do you think of Asmodee getting this license to make Marvel games? What is your first impressions of these games? I'm very interested in the LCG. I like the idea of playing a bit more of a kitchen table casual kind of game. My competitive edge is already sort of like invested in Magic and X-Wing, so I think this is a good first step for FFG with the Marvel license. And as far as the minis game goes, it looks decent. The fact that you don't have so many minis to paint is appealing for someone like me who doesn't have all that much spare time. I think so long as the rule set is fun and tight, I think it can be something very successful, but we will have to wait and see. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, more information on these as they develop. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon as well, and thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. I'll catch you all in the next video.